Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so today we're unpacking something that is, well, it's honestly a little terrifying. We're going to dive into this incredible Gothic fable that completely upends how we think about human communication. It reveals language not as this simple, subservient tool that you and I control, but as an ancient, autonomous, and predatory organism. It's a brilliant conceptual piece called The Philology of the Curse, and it essentially maps a very old philosophical quarrel onto a genuinely grim, dark folk horror setting. Right off the bat, listen to this quote. Every spoken word secretly buries its own ancient, forgotten corpse. Think about that for a second. Imagine the dead history of humanity sitting right there in your own mouth as you speak. This is a deeply Nietzschean idea, and it perfectly sets the stage for our nightmare. The whole premise here is that digging into the roots of a word doesn't reveal some pure, beautiful origin. Instead, you find a corpse. You find sedimented history, not timeless meaning. To chart our descent into total linguistic nihilism, we're going to read through these chapters like the anatomy of a curse. First, the corpse in the word. Then, the uncanny phonetic shift. Third, a grammar-demanding sacrifice. Fourth, the magistrate turned to wood. Fifth, a prison made of syntax. And finally, the final theft of nouns. And to structure our exploration, we're actually going to follow a Fictinian dialectic. So we move from the thesis, which is our comforting illusion that language is just a subservient human tool, to the antithesis, where language is revealed as an autonomous physical predator. And finally, we reach the synthesis, a state of total linguistic nihilism where the song and the cage collapse into one generative silence. Chapter 1, The Corpse in the Word. So the story kicks off with a minstrel who makes this bizarre and chilling claim. He says his music lives inside the changing roots of verbs. In this folk horror setting, the genealogical method is quite literally brought to life. Like we talked about, digging into etymology doesn't reveal a pure origin, it reveals a corpse. This mirrors the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's argument that truths are just a mobile army of metaphors that have hardened into law. The minstrel's basically bringing those dead, forgotten syllables back to life. Chapter 2. The uncanny phonetic shift. This is where the story beautifully bridges linguistics and psychology. We're looking at Sigmund Freud's concept of the uncanny. It's the idea that the heimly, meaning homely or familiar, and the unheimly, meaning terrifying or unhomely, well, they aren't actually opposites. They are the exact same word. The horror comes from the concealed meaning surfacing inside the familiar one. But in our fable, time acting on speech mirrors trauma acting on memory. It triggers a terrifying return of the repressed, not just as a feeling, but as a physical, linguistic event, driven by ancient Germanic sound shifts. And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying pivot of the whole cycle. Through real historical linguistic mechanisms, like consonant and vowel drifts, cozy, comforting hearth songs physically transform into sudden, terrifying funeral hymns. The villagers haven't encountered a monster in the woods, they simply fail to recognize their own native tongue. The very tool meant to define them ends up estranging them from their own identities. Chapter 3. A grammar-demanding sacrifice. Right, so here is where the semantic horror transitions into violent, physical cause and effect. Etymological forgetting isn't just neutral decay in this story. The gradual semantic drift over the years renders the old binding words incomplete. So suddenly, in a matter of moments, the word is broken. And because the word is broken, it develops a phonetic hunger. It actively demands a physical flesh sacrifice to supply the missing syllable. The linguistic gap literally consumes reality to make itself whole. Chapter 4. The magistrate turned to wood. Now we get to the town magistrate, who is a figure of civic and legal authority. Now, in law, words are absolutely supposed to have stable, binding power over reality, right? The magistrate represents our human assumption of agency, that we are the masters of our words. But when he attempts to play the minstrel's silent lute to assert his control, the parable brutally punishes him. His human agency is destroyed by language's power. His fingers freeze into stiff wood. He's literally consumed by the word, becoming the instrument himself. This grotesque moment of body horror perfectly captures the philosopher Martin Heidegger's view, Die Sprache spricht. Language speaks, not man. We so often treat this as a mystical-sounding abstraction, but this fable literalizes it. We do not use language. Rather, we are spoken by it. And if we aren't careful, we are entirely consumed by it. Chapter 5. A prison made of syntax. You know that old biblical and Kabbalistic tradition that in the beginning was the Word? The idea that the Word creates and sustains the world, and knowing a true name gives you power over a thing? Well, this fable flips that polarity entirely. Knowing the name doesn't give the singer power, it gives the grammar itself power. Grammar becomes the physical scaffolding of an eternal, silent prison. The cage isn't metaphorical anymore, it is architectural. The word doesn't create the world, it locks the town in place, and the singer is nothing more than a helpless conduit. Chapter 6. The Final Theft of Nouns. This brings us to what is easily the psychologically sharpest beat in the entire cycle. The curse targets naming specifically. Look, losing verbs might mean losing action, which is bad enough. But stealing nouns? That erases the referential apparatus entirely. By stealing nouns, the citizens cannot even locate or name their own suffering to themselves. It closely mirrors the clinical picture of alexithymia, or severe dissociation. The true horror here isn't just muteness. It's the absolute erasure of the ability to even define your personal pain. And the fable closes with this haunting epilogue of echoes. The song finally ended, but the terrible quiet still plays. This reveals our Fichtean synthesis. The negation of language isn't just an absence or a void. Actually, scratch that. It's not an absence at all. It is a positive generative force. Total linguistic nihilism is achieved, and silence itself becomes an active, ongoing performance that outlasts the humans who once thought they controlled the song. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider this. If grammar is a literal physical cage, and the very nouns needed to define your suffering were stolen by an ancient predatory language, how would you scream? When the words needed to reference your own pain have been consumed, the true nightmare is the silence left behind. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this dark, brilliant fable.